Major developing story, a big automaker deal that now might fall through. In March of last year, the provincial and federal governments celebrated what was then the largest investment in Canada's auto sector, the first large-scale electric vehicle battery plant to come to this country. The $5 billion project was supposed to bring about 2,500 jobs to Windsor, Ontario, but today, work stopped. Yep, you heard that right. It stopped. Automaker Stellantis says the Canadian government has not delivered on what was agreed to. Therefore, Stellantis and LG Energy Solution will begin implementing their contingency plans. Effective immediately, all construction related to the battery module production on the Windsor site has stopped.
When it comes to Stellantis, we are very supportive of this investment, and I am absolutely confident that we're going to get a deal. But I also want to point out that the resources of the federal government are not infinite, and we are counting on Ontario to do its fair share, and we're counting on Stellantis to be reasonable.
We requested interviews with federal ministers Champagne, Freeland and Ng. Nobody was available. Joining us live right now, though, however, Ontario's Economic Development Minister Vic Fedeli. Minister Fedeli, great to have you with us. Thanks for making the time.
Nice to be back, Vassy.
You just heard Minister Freeland there say that the federal government's resources aren't infinite, that they expect Ontario to pay its fair share. Has your government done everything in its power to make sure this deal goes through?
Well, we made an agreement with Stellantis more than a year ago that's virtually identical, by the way, to the agreement we made with Volkswagen only months ago. And we've honored our agreement, and we would expect the federal government would honor their agreement that they made as well. Look, I would say they've been a great partner. Ontario went from zero in the EV business to $25 billion in the last 2.5 years, but we did it hand in hand with the federal government, but we expect them to honor their commitment.
So do I read between the lines there and say that your government is not prepared to increase its investment in this plant, which is, I understand, about $500 million, if equivalent to that investment in VW?
We, both the feds and the province, made capital commitments to Stellantis and capital commitments to Volkswagen. And further to those, the Ontario government, for instance, on the Volkswagen deal, we're in for hundreds of millions more to the community for sewer, water, other kinds of infrastructure. We're doing the same thing in Windsor for the community there with road work, with infrastructure work. So we are spending, in addition to the investment that we made on capital, we're making investments in infrastructure to the community in the hundreds of millions. The feds have made a further deal to honor the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll call it the IRA. That's a federal-to-federal deal that they've made. You know, we'll go up against any state, any province, any time, and we've been continuing to win here in Ontario by the good investment, prudent investment that we've been making.
I have to ask you, though, Minister, and I certainly do understand the framing you're putting forth. Yes, it is the federal government in their budget that said we will try to match or compete in certain areas with what the IRA spells out. And just so our viewers know, what the IRA does, pardon me, is not small potatoes. We're talking $360 billion, and specifically in this case, it's an advanced manufacturing credit that my understanding is equivalent to handing over $1 to $2 billion a year to a company like Stellantis or Volkswagen. That is a lot of money. If Ontario wants to be home to these battery plants, is it not reasonable of the federal government to say, look, our resources are not infinite, and the province should share in a piece of this, not to the same level as the federal government, and I understand the investments you've already laid out, but you need to play a bigger role in being able to secure these kinds of investments, since it is specifically the province of Ontario and Ontarians who are going to benefit.
Well, we are playing a bigger role by investing hundreds of millions in the infrastructure in both Windsor and area and St. Thomas and area for both Stellantis and Volkswagen. Look, we sat at the table together to make capital investments. We made those decisions. The feds sat at a different table to make the IRA decision. We are not party to that. We are not at any of those meetings. We've never seen the contract that they signed with Stellantis. So all we're saying is we hear Stellantis. ask the federal government to honor their commitment, and that's what we would be asking as well.
Respectfully, though, Minister, the substance of my question was whether you're willing to go outside the table as you described it's being set. And if, in fact, there are 2,500 Ontario jobs on the line and the federal government's resources are not infinite, are you willing to sit at another table and have a talk with the federal government about the province playing an even bigger role than the one you've already outlined?
But it's the federal government that made a commitment to Stellantis on the IRA, and what Stellantis is asking, and everyone else is asking, including us, is that the federal government honor the commitment that they made to Stellantis. We've not seen that commitment. But what we have done is stepped up with hundreds of millions more in energy infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, new roads, new access, both in St. Thomas and in Windsor.
I understand it's a fair point that they made that agreement, but if the federal government, let me ask you then, Minister, so it's clear for people watching tonight, if the federal government does come to you, and maybe they already have, you can share with us, and says, hey, we need some help in this area because things are going to fall through. This is going to cost us, upwards of $20 billion. Can you share a bigger portion? Is that something you are willing to entertain?
Well, what we're willing to suggest is that the federal government should honor that commitment. We're already putting $500 million into the company. We're putting hundreds of millions into the road and sewer and water. We're matching the state to state, state to province asks. We're going toe-to-toe with all of these states and coming out ahead with the investments that we're making. And it's continued to be up to the federal government to meet and match the federal government of the United States. That's an issue that they took on, and it's an issue that they agreed to. It's a commitment that they made, and not one that we've ever seen, but we know that's a commitment that they made, and we're asking them, honor your commitment.
And I'm not disagreeing. I completely understand the point you're making. I'm just asking you outside of that commitment. And my understanding, based on what you've said so far, is that $500 million is or the hundreds of millions that you've decided to invest so far is the cap. That's as far as your province is willing to go. Are you okay with that if the deal falls through?
We're always looking to the community to see if there are other things that we can do to assist them, to help with the infrastructure. We're, just as we've done with Volkswagen, just as we've done with Windsor, and all the communities that we've landed, $25 billion. Again, we went from 0 to 25 billion. And we've had a great partner in the feds, and we just need them now to honor the commitments that they made.
Just before I let you go, Minister, and I'll ask a federal MP next about that commitment. I remember that announcement very well, and I'm listening, and as I hear you sort of tell the people of Ontario and Canada the degree to which this industry has been built up. But I think what a lot of Ontarians and Canadians are thinking today as they see how kind of precious this deal is, or how easily it can be put to a stop, is it really what your government and the federal government is selling us? Is it really that much of a guarantee? Are we really getting good-paying jobs out of this? Are we really getting the industry of the future if all of a sudden on a Friday, one of the companies can say, hey, this isn't really what we thought it would be, we're pulling out?
Well, none of the companies receive any dollars from the province until the jobs have been created, so it's we're protected financially from that respect. But we've also been at other openings where we've seen, for instance, at General Motors, 2,700 men and women went to work in Oshawa today, where a little more than a year ago there were 0. Or General Motors' Bright Drop facility, where we saw the FedEx-style truck roll off the assembly line, Canada's very first EV vehicle, roll off the assembly line. So we're excited by the fact that we saw 100,000 men and women working in a traditional industry. We had no new lines coming on for many of these plants where they would have gone away, left Ontario. So we've saved those 100,000 workers. There's 700 parts manufacturers, 500 tool and die makers, 300 connected and autonomous. In my hometown of North Bay, I was at an opening of Canadore College's brand new electric battery training center, because you're not going to have a mechanic anymore to work on your car. You're going to have a technician. We're training those students. Over in Sudbury, where they're pulling battery-grade nickel out of the ground, there are thousands of mining jobs being created in there, and in northwestern Ontario, where there's lithium in the ground. We are, you know, we went from 0 to 25 billion, but that's important, is we went from 0, last place, to ranked second globally by in the global ranking of battery vehicle supply producers, from 0 to second place in the world, first in North America.
Okay, I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. Minister, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you.